over the last 25 years, I've had the privilege of interviewing and highlighting some truly interesting people. Everyone who is anyone, both the famous and the infamous, from presidents and their first ladies to kings and queens, movie stars and pop stars, captains of industry, heads of state, sports personalities, innovative entrepreneurs, and some pretty fascinating everyday people. Today, I'm proud to introduce you to Dr. Lawrence Devoe, Professor Emeritus, who is a retired clinician, researcher, educator, and author who takes pride in the thousands of people he's touched throughout his career, which includes patients, students, residents, fellows, and other faculty members. Dr. Devoe, it's such a pleasure to speak with you today and just talk about your amazing career. Why don't we start with what led you to pursue medicine as a field of study?
When I was 5 years old, I told my grandfather, who was my role model and who also was a physician, that I wanted to be just like him. And over the time that passed, that desire to become a physician has never wavered. I wanted to go to the same medical school that he graduated from in 1911, mission accomplished. And the only difference was that he was a urologist and most of his patients were old men. And I went to OB/GYN and most of my patients were young women.
So you did follow in his footsteps, but you did took opposite tracks.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And you know what? I'm curious because I chose law as a young person. Also, I was 8 years old. I remember the exact moment I told my grandmother that I wanted to become a lawyer. Why did you choose medicine? I understand that's something that your family had done, but what about you personally? What drew you to medicine, sir?
Well, I saw the opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. And it's an unrivaled opportunity and a privilege that relatively few people have, considering the number of physicians that are practicing today in the United States. And that's what really drove me. I said, I'm only one person, but I can make a difference in thousands of lives.
You absolutely can. I am a heart disease survivor. I'm not sure if you know that. And tomorrow just happens to be the 11th anniversary of my open heart surgery. And so I think about the doctors who saved my life. I think about the research that went in to the techniques and the actual skill set to save my life. And I know you spent some time in the medical corps. I'm just curious, how did that experience shape the way you viewed and practiced medicine, sir?
Well, I remember getting that letter from the Department of Defense in March of 1971. And you might not know this, but a draft notice does not say greetings. This is you by name and says when you should report for your induction physical exam. And then if you pass that, which everybody did, then when do you report for active duty? And so I was in the third to last doctor draft of the Vietnam War. I mean, it was a special draft because they needed doctors. So it didn't matter how old you were or what your draft number was, you got called up. And I was in the middle of my residency in OB/GYN. And to make things even more ironic, I got shipped off to Fort Benning, the home of the infantry, and all my patients were men.
Oh, my goodness.
And we used to tell the troops that misbehaved, if you do that often enough, I'm going to do a pap smear on you.
I love it.
So, so I spent a glorious 731 days and nights at Fort Benning. They decided not to send me to Vietnam my second year in. And I was a company commander. I had 15 medics. And so what I learned from that experience was, number one, how to give orders, how to be in command, how to be in charge. And that carried over into my civilian life. I didn't realize it at the time, but eventually I became a section director in maternal fetal medicine. So I had people under me. And then I became a department head and I had more people under me. So I had to be able to give orders and commands. The other aspect of that, which I didn't know would at all be useful, happened this past year when we had the COVID-19 pandemic. And I was running a unit with ultrasonographers doing obstetric ultrasounds. And before the pandemic scope really was known, I called back on my disaster drill training in the Army. We had disaster drills every single month. And one of them was what to do in case your area is overrun by an epidemic.
Ah.
I remember that was almost 50 years ago that I put in the same measures before anybody else did those in our medical center. And, thank God, knock on wood, none of my sonographers got sick. And they're, if you look at what sonographers do, they're like a foot and a half away from a patient for a half an hour. And so we had a very safe unit, and it continues, even though I've retired, it continues to this day to be a very safe unit.
So, Dr. Devoe, this is actually a topic that I am extremely interested in, and I've been working with the new Vice President of the United States on this particular topic, maternal mortality, especially in the communities of color. And I know, since this is your area of expertise, that you've had to focus on that.
Oh, absolutely. I took care of patients for most of my career, many of whom had very serious medical problems. And you have people that are in their 20s having the kinds of problems that people don't usually get until their 50s or 60s. So they were sort of prematurely aged by the medical problems that they had. We focused intensely on trying to improve the health of these patients while they were pregnant, and then also counseled them that if they're considering going through another pregnancy, assuming that they survive this one, that they get what we call preconceptual counseling. In other words, they talk to somebody like me about the risks involved, what to do to improve yourself before you become pregnant, so that the likelihood of your having a serious or adverse event or dying would be diminished. Mm-hmm. The difficulty, and this is what people don't really understand, but it does explain to a degree why patients of color do have higher risk conditions, is that a lot of this is genetically determined.
Yes, sir.
You can run as fast as you want, but you can't outrun your genes. And so we go over that with patients and say, you are at risk for these conditions. The best that we can do, we may not be able to prevent them from happening, but we can do our best to prevent them becoming life-threatening or health-threatening.
And the ability to mitigate what is already there, I think, is valuable information. With my heart disease in particular, part of it was genetic, and the other part was an underlying condition of having been sedentary for a vast majority of my life and then moving into obesity. And so I know, in addition to genetics, when it comes to pregnant women, whatever underlying condition that exists is going to manifest itself throughout the pregnancy.
That's correct. And what I did in my practice was, on the very first visit that a patient came in to see me, we would sit down and I would give her the opening curtain to final curtain scenario of what her pregnancy is likely to be, so that there would be as few surprises as possible, but it also would enable her to understand my approach, my philosophy of care, and make her better informed, because really an informed patient is going to do better than a patient who's totally clueless.
Dr. Devoe, I cannot think of anything that would be a better epithet for a professional than to your own self, to thine own self be true, and to do things with integrity. Would you say that is one of the foundations to your secret to success as a medical professional?
Well, I don't know about secrets to success, because I really believe that success doesn't happen by secrets, but it happens by dedication to finding a dream that you want to pursue, and then going after that dream the best that you can, setting goals, setting them high. And if you set the bar high, you might not reach it all the time, but it'll at least make you the best at what you do. And so if these are secrets, they're my secrets. And the other secrets are basically setting a timetable. I used to keep a little book with me that had a 1-year plan, a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, and a 10-year plan. And where did I see myself at each one of these junctures? And with the grace of God and good fortune, I was able to achieve every single one of the milestones that I set for myself before I retired.
That military discipline is so very clear in everything you do, and I see it as a tremendous positive because having a plan of action, or as my grandmother would actually say, if you fail to plan, then plan to fail. And so I love that you have put plans in place. So let me get to know Dr. Devoe a little bit better. Share with us what you do in your spare time away from patient care, sir.
Well, I was sort of a victim of the Renaissance child era, and my parents, because I was the oldest of four, decided they would try everything out on me. I studied music for 12 years, both instrument and voice. I studied classical dance. I studied art in all of its forms. And if that was not enough, my father, who was a good tennis player, insisted that I also become a good tennis player. So these were all the things I thought was normal. And I found out from my friends that I was the only one that was doing all of these things at the same time. But what this did was it instilled in me a love for the arts, a real passion for watching people do things well. And because I studied voice, opera was one of the things that I became passionate about. And my wife and I are out of town patrons for the Metropolitan Opera of New York. And we see usually about a third of the season on and off at different times of the year. I took her to the first opera she'd ever been to, and it was called Romeo and Juliet by Charles Gounod. I didn't tell her it was 3.5 hours long. And I didn't tell her it was in French, a language I speak fluently, and there were no subtitles. And she still went out on dates with me after that, so I must have done something right. And now she's Facebook friends with a lot of the singers that sing at the Met, and a real opera veteran.
You wrote a book called Yankee by Birth, Southern by Choice. It's so interesting. I was born in the South, raised in the North, but I'm a Southerner in my heart. So that's something we share. Tell me about that book and why the South means so much to you.
Well, it begins with, first of all, my Southern roots, which was my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
And my first trip to the South, we went there when I was 14, and that was before they had interstates. And he had a massive Cadillac sedan, and he taught me how to drive in a wheat field outside of Chicago because it was a 15-hour drive, and he wasn't going to let my grandmother drive because she was too short to see over the steering wheel. So I met my Southern relatives in Monroe, Louisiana, and I spent an entire week listening to people talk whom I couldn't understand. The book actually is, I've been thinking about this book for a long time. I started it a little less than 4 years ago, but I was still working, so I didn't have the time to really finish it until I retired. And it's about a journey taken by one person who grew up in the North, had little contact with the South, and then moved to the South, married into the South, and became an adopted son of the South. And now I've lived in the South more than half my life, so I consider myself a Southerner who has yet to acquire the accent.
Well, I know you told me that you grew up in what you consider the Renaissance time, but I think as we've seen throughout this conversation, you're a bit of a Renaissance man yourself. So, what's the one thing you'd like the viewer of the video feature to walk away with, sir?
Well, I would like people to think about the concept of touch, because touch it's a human quality that is unique. And you can touch people physically, which I did with delivering over 10,000 babies. I was the first person to touch them in their lives. You touch patients, you give them a hug, you let them know that everything's okay. You touch the people that you educate and train. And that touch leads to making you able, through your trainees, make you able to do far more good in life than you could as a single individual. And it's so important. It's such an important thing to do. And it's stayed with me my entire life. How important just touching people, either physically, emotionally, or mentally, how much that means.
What a thoughtful thing to say. I mean, I of all things, I have this quote in the back of my head. I guess I may be a bit of a Renaissance woman. It was a Keats quote. Touch has a memory is a famous quote by Thomas Keats, and I thought, yes, indeed, it does. And what you have just outlined is that first touch that you put your hands on a new life, and it's to say to that life, everything's going to be okay, and best wishes on everything that comes next. Thank you, Dr. Devoe. It's such a pleasure to spend some time with you and just chat about your phenomenal career.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure on my part as well.